There is a specific kind of person who will drain you completely and never once feel responsible for it. You won't see it coming. That's the point. Because emotional dependency doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with warning signs or a history of obvious manipulation. It arrives wearing the face of love, of closeness, of someone who simply needs you more than anyone else ever has. And that feeling, being needed that deeply, is one of the most dangerous traps in human psychology. Most people think emotional dependency is about weakness. They imagine it as the clingy partner, the friend who calls too often, the person who falls apart when you create distance. They think it's easy to spot, easy to manage. They are wrong, because the most sophisticated forms of emotional dependency have nothing to do with visible desperation. They operate through something far more difficult to detect: the subtle restructuring of your emotional world until the dependent person becomes the center of it. You don't notice it happening. You just wake up one day and realize that your moods are tied to theirs. Your peace is contingent on their approval. Your sense of self has quietly merged with someone else's needs. That is not love. That is occupation. The most effective chain is the one the prisoner helped build. The first truth: emotional dependency is a transfer of power. Understand this clearly. When someone becomes emotionally dependent on you, or when you become emotionally dependent on someone else, what is actually happening is a transfer of psychological authority. The dependent person isn't just seeking comfort. They are anchoring their internal stability to an external source, which means that source, you, now carries the weight of their emotional regulation. Their calm depends on your presence. Their confidence depends on your validation. Their ability to function depends on your consistency. This sounds like intimacy. It is not. Real intimacy is two people who choose each other from a place of wholeness. Emotional dependency is one person, or both, choosing each other from a place of incompleteness. The relationship becomes a mechanism for managing anxiety, not a genuine connection between two people. The distinction matters, because when you are the source of someone's emotional regulation, you are no longer a partner in the relationship. You are the relationship's infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't get to have needs of its own. That is the transfer. That is where your power goes. The second truth: the dependency is often mutual. And that's where it gets dangerous. Here is where most people make the critical error. They assume that in a dynamic of emotional dependency, one person is the victim and one is the manipulator. That one person needs and the other simply provides. Clean, asymmetric. But that is almost never the structure. In the majority of emotionally dependent relationships, both people are caught. One person needs to be needed, the other needs to need. And together, they construct a closed system, a feedback loop where both parties are continuously reinforcing each other's dysfunction while calling it devotion. The person who can't stop giving, who derives their identity from being indispensable. They are not a victim. They are a participant. Their dependency is just less visible because it wears a more socially acceptable costume. They are addicted to being required, and the person who appears fragile, who leans heavily, who creates crisis after crisis, they are not always conscious of what they are doing. But their behavior functions as a mechanism. Every collapse draws the other person closer. Every need met is proof that the relationship is working. Every moment of crisis is a reinforcement. You need me as much as I need you. When both people are dependent in this way, the relationship doesn't feel broken. It feels intense. It feels irreplaceable. It feels like nothing else has ever compared. Because nothing else has ever been this consuming. That consuming quality is not a sign of depth. It is a sign of entrapment. The third truth: emotional dependency disguises itself as love. This is where the real damage begins. Because the feelings are real. The attachment is real. The pain when the relationship is threatened is real. None of that is fabricated. And so people defend these dynamics with ferocity. Because from the inside, it genuinely feels like the deepest love they've ever experienced. But depth of feeling is not evidence of health. You can feel profoundly attached to something that is slowly dismantling you. The intensity of the emotion is not a measure of the relationship's quality. It is often a measure of how thoroughly it has restructured your psychology. Consider what emotional dependency actually produces over time. You become less yourself. Your interests quietly narrow. Your outside relationships atrophy. Because the dependent dynamic, by its nature, requires increasing amounts of energy to sustain. You have less time for other people, less patience, less presence. Because you are perpetually managing the emotional weather of a system that was never designed to stabilize. You stop doing things that used to matter to you. You start organizing your life around someone else's emotional state. And if you try to create distance, if you try to reclaim some portion of your original self, the reaction is immediate. Guilt, accusation, the implicit or explicit message that your independence is a form of abandonment. This is the mechanism. Your selfhood becomes the threat. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. When was the last time you made a decision, a real decision, without first calculating how it would affect someone else's emotional state? If you had to think about that for more than a second, you already have your answer. The fourth truth: breaking emotional dependency requires something most people aren't willing to do. The conventional advice is predictable. Set boundaries, communicate your needs, seek therapy, create space. All of that is true. None of it is enough on its own. Because the real obstacle to leaving a dynamic of emotional dependency isn't practical. It isn't logistical. It is the terror of emotional withdrawal. Emotional dependency functions neurologically in ways that are structurally similar to addiction. The presence of the person you're dependent on, or the person who depends on you, activates reward pathways. The absence of that person activates the same physiological stress response as withdrawal from a substance. This is not metaphor. This is documented neurochemical reality, which means that the experience of leaving an emotionally dependent dynamic, or attempting to dismantle one, feels, from the inside, like a survival threat. The body registers it as danger. The mind manufactures reasons why leaving is wrong, selfish, unnecessary, or premature. The mind will construct an entire philosophy to justify staying. It will find every fault in the people who are trying to pull you out. It will romanticize the relationship with surgical precision. This is why people return. Not because they have failed to understand, not because they lack willpower, but because the nervous system has been conditioned to interpret that specific person's presence as safety, even when that person is the source of the instability. Understanding this doesn't immediately dissolve it, but it changes the nature of the struggle. You stop fighting the relationship and start fighting the chemistry. The fifth truth: the people most vulnerable to emotional dependency were made that way. Nobody arrives at emotional dependency by accident. The patterns that make a person susceptible, the hunger for external validation, the inability to self-regulate, the reflexive need to earn affection rather than receive it freely. These don't emerge from nowhere. They are the learned architecture of early emotional experience. The person who grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned through performance, through compliance, through shrinking themselves to accommodate the emotional needs of the adults around them. That person develops a very specific belief. The belief is this: love is something you have to constantly maintain, or it will leave. And once that belief is installed deeply enough, it operates beneath conscious awareness. It shapes behavior without announcing itself. The adult who holds this belief will unconsciously create the conditions that confirm it, drawing toward people who withhold, who run hot and cold, who require constant emotional labor in exchange for intermittent warmth, because that pattern is familiar, and familiarity feels like home, even when home was never safe. This is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is the logical outcome of an illogical emotional education. Recognizing it is not the same as escaping it, but recognition is the beginning of a different conversation. The one you start having with yourself instead of through someone else. The sixth truth: independence is not coldness. It is the prerequisite for real connection. People confuse emotional independence with emotional unavailability. They are not the same. The person who has done the internal work, who has stopped anchoring their identity, their peace, and their sense of worth to the behavior of another human being, is not colder. They are not more distant. They are not incapable of love. They are simply no longer desperate. And desperation, it turns out, was never love to begin with. It was fear wearing love's face. The person who loves you from a place of wholeness will not collapse when you disappoint them. They will not disintegrate when you need space. They will not punish you with withdrawal or silence to regulate their own anxiety. They will be capable of disagreement without catastrophe. That kind of presence, stable, clear, genuinely voluntary, is rare, because most people have never built it in themselves. They have outsourced their emotional stability for so long that they have no direct relationship with their own interior. They know what they feel through other people. They discover what they want through other people's reactions. They understand who they are through the mirror of a relationship. And the moment that mirror is removed, they find nothing behind it. This is the real cost of emotional dependency. Not just the relationship it corrupts, but the self it slowly erases. The most disciplined thing you will ever do is learn to be the source of your own stability. Not because other people can't matter, but because the moment someone else becomes necessary for your peace, they own your peace, and they will use it, maybe unconsciously, but they will use it. The seventh truth: most people will never escape this, because the system depends on them staying. This is the part nobody discusses. Emotional dependency is not just a personal psychological pattern. It is also a social and cultural norm. It is embedded in how people are taught to think about romantic love, friendship, family, and belonging. The narrative that surrounds love in most cultures is fundamentally dependency-coded. The ideal relationship, as presented through film, music, religion, social expectation, is one of absolute necessity. You complete me. I can't live without you. You are my everything. These are not romantic statements. These are descriptions of a psychological emergency. But they are celebrated. They are enshrined. And so people pursue them, actively seeking the intensity of need, mistaking the panic of attachment for the depth of love. The culture does not teach you to be whole. The culture teaches you to need. Because people who are whole make very different economic and social decisions. They are harder to market to, harder to control, harder to keep in structures, relationships, institutions, belief systems that require their continued emotional investment to function. The person who does not need external validation to feel legitimate is extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. That is not a coincidence. Independence is not celebrated in most cultures because it is not useful to the systems that most cultures are built to serve. Understanding this doesn't make you cynical. It makes you accurate. The truth about emotional dependency is that it is not primarily a relationship problem. It is an identity problem. And identity problems cannot be solved by changing partners. They can only be solved by returning slowly, deliberately, often painfully, to something that was there before the first relationship ever began. Yourself, not the version that learned to perform for approval, not the version that made itself small to avoid abandonment, not the version that outsourced its sense of worth to whoever was willing to temporarily provide it. The part that existed before you were taught that love was something you had to earn. That part is still there, buried under years of learned dependency, conditioned anxiety, and the accumulated weight of every relationship that reinforced the original wound. It is not gone. But it requires something most people are not willing to give it. The question isn't whether you've been emotionally dependent. Almost everyone has been. The question is whether the pattern is still running, quietly, in the background of every connection you form, shaping who you attract, what you tolerate, and what you mistake for intimacy. And if it is, the work that comes next is not about relationships at all. It is about something older, something most people never think to examine. And that is exactly where this continues.